must, as their duty, fight. Okay? And when is there a duty to fight, according to Ambrose? There's a duty to fight, and we've really kind of hit it. A duty to fight when the state is attacked, the sovereign has declared war, and you need to protect those others around you. Okay, that is when a Christian needs to, and not every, obviously, not every Christian, but those, I think, and Ambrose never fleshed this out. But it's interesting that he talked about a duty element, because that is a huge swing from the early church fathers, who said our duty is to pray, not to fight. Ambrose said there is a duty to fight when we need to defend others around us, and he was
to behave collectively.
Right, to behave collectively. Right. And he never said, okay, that means every able-bodied male between the ages of 18 and 54. There certainly wasn't anything that, but it was still interesting that he introduced this duty element. But on the flip side, he also said there is a duty, and we've talked about this too, there's a duty not to fight. And when would that be, based on what we've talked about today? When do you have a duty not to fight? When you're walking down the road and here come the robbers and yeah.
Personal.
Right. That's where you exercise pacifism. Okay. So
Except for protective children.
Agreed. But this is how he. Yeah. Right. I mean, certainly. Well, and you're making Susan's argument, which was very well said. I think that's very interesting. I do. I think that's very interesting to talk about when you're looking prospectively. Okay, if I get attacked, my children aren't going to have a father. If I'm a guy, so I'm protecting them. I don't think that's what he meant. Okay, but I still think that's a fair question to ask. I think that's a fair question. So anyhow, that's Ambrose for you. And Augustine obviously was well read in Ambrose. He knew Ambrose. He and Ambrose were friends. He, in fact, when Ambrose died, it was very difficult on him. He buried Ambrose. And of course, Augustine knew Cicero. I think I mentioned last week. Ambrose certainly was the one that really converted and baptized, did the whole thing with Augustine. But remember what Augustine said about Cicero. I don't know if you do. In his Confessions, he started reading Cicero at a young age. He taught rhetoric. He was a pagan. He wasn't as bad as he sometimes thought he was, I think, but he was certainly a pagan. And he said that when he started reading Cicero, that was the very beginning. That was the seed that was planted that led to his conversion to Christ. Which is interesting because Cicero first lived before the time of Christ, and second was not Jewish, and was not versed in any kind of, as we would call, Judeo-type Christian background. Isn't it interesting? So, Augustine's known as the father of the just war theory. I mentioned this earlier. And the reason that he is because even up to today, and you've got, the just war doctrine is a Christian doctrine, but many international law scholars, they'll give that tip of the hat maybe, but they're not going to acknowledge it. It's both a Christian, it comes in Christian and secular varieties. It's still what you see though on this handout. And regardless of what version that you throw out there, it has its roots in Augustine, not in Plato, not in Cicero, not in Aquinas even, but in Augustine. When Aquinas started writing on his just war theory, he started by quoting Augustine. Now Aquinas provided, and Aquinas is next week. So Aquinas provided excellent additional thought, additional theory on just war. But Augustine was really the man. He's the man. I mean, he did not, however, write a book called Just War Theory or the Just War Doctrine by St. Augustine. Instead, most of his just war writings were written over a 41-year period. Okay, and they're sprinkled all through his, the City of God, various letters that he wrote. But usually they're written in little short, not short sentences, but little short writings that address a specific issue. Okay, and some people say, he wasn't systematic at all. I disagree. It may not be all together in one volume, but he, in my opinion, clearly provided a theory, a constant, it never changed, a system of thought. And he started writing on just war 1 year after his conversion, so he hit this pretty early.
Are you saying he was being intentional about it, but he was putting in a little snippets because of a psychology or something?
I don't think so. I don't think he was I think what he was doing was dealing with, what can I say to this Roman general in this letter about how he should act in war? Because he's got the Vandals on the other side of the battlefield, or infiltrating the camp. So I don't think he even set out per se to hope that by the end of his life that those who came after him would understand when to fight and how to fight. I really think, and it goes back to the barbarian invasion, that he had an idea, a very clear idea of how war should be fought, but that it was his writings were designed for the soldier, the general, and the Christian. At that moment, dealing with what they were dealing with, which I think makes it even more brilliant that 1,500 years later, 1,700 years later, we still talk about Augustine.
Who compiled his writings and separated them out?
Oh, that's a good question.
I'll see if I can find out this week.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. Does anybody know that answer to that one?
The Augustinians?
Fine answer. I'm going to go with that. Yeah.
That was just a guess.
That sounded so good. Thanks so much.
That's
Your
it,
public
right?
library.
All right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Wikipedia did it. Yeah.
Wikipedia.
Jen, there's a good Catholic encyclopedia that's actually as good, if not better, than Wikipedia.
That's impossible.
I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. I really, it's really bad, but often when I write, I shouldn't admit this with a video recorder, but I do go to Wikipedia, only because they do provide sources at the bottom where you can test what they've said, and then you get additional sources. So, yes, it's true that anybody can put anything on Wikipedia. There is some filtering, but it's not all bad. It's the lazy woman's research tool.
It's a good jumping off place.
Right. But it can get a little crazy. Anyhow, all right, we've already talked about Augustine's background. We'll move on to the theological, philosophical assumptions. If we don't actually get to his criteria that he hits, I'm not going to feel terribly, like we were at a loss, because also if you go online, I'll have this up in about a day or two on our website, and you're welcome to take a look. I think there's just so much here, we can't hit it all. Augustine's view of man. Does anybody know a little bit about his view of man?
He developed original sin as a doctrine, I believe.
Right, that's fair to say. He sometimes his view of man was somber. Okay, it was somber. It was and more somber than a lot of the earlier church fathers. For instance, I think of Irenaeus, but that's just an example, who talked about the goodness of human nature and what it meant that man was made in the image of God. And you see a more positive take on man. Augustine focused a little bit more on the fall, and on the concept of original sin, that we were tainted through and through. Okay. And I don't want to get into whether he was theologically correct or not. The reason I mention this is simply because it informed his views regarding the just war doctrine. He did not believe that man could live in an orderly manner and find his way back to God on his own. He did not believe that, and that made a difference in his just war doctrine. He had this there's this term that you use when that scholars sometimes use. I came across it several times when I was doing my research last year. Called, this is Latin, so I'm probably going to butcher it, libido domini. What does that mean?
I don't know, the domini is of the Lord, to the Lord.
Domini
Domini is of the Lord.
How's the ending?
D-O-M-I-N-I.
Yeah, so
It's
of the
possessive.
Lord.
Okay.
Yeah, possessive.
Well, what it meant for Augustine was a lust for domination. Okay. So it wasn't, domini for some reason was domination. So I may have said it wrong or something
Yeah,
like that.
something's wrong.
Yeah, but regardless, this lust for domination, that he was very, very, he concentrated on this a lot. This lust for domination is what causes man to act. Man will always act in whatever way will allow him to dominate. Yet, at the same time, peace is what man naturally seeks. Okay, that was the other side of the coin for him. In the city of God, he talked about how, he talks about the city of man, the city of God, and how even though they're very different, they have one thing in common, and that is that they desire peace. Man, because he is a fallen and unable to do good of himself, will always, what he calls aping God. By aping God, he wages war